warring powers to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding of man and the fulfillment of his most cherished wish for freedom, tolerance, and justice.
World War II was one of the most devastating events in human history, and since then it has been monetized extensively by everyone and their mothers. Through this, one of the most popular video game franchises has been born and continues to live on in the gamer sphere. Call of Duty is one of those franchises that I was never really into. Its yearly releases and high focus on multiplayer never really had me hooked. So, it would be very safe to say that when I decided in the middle of September to purchase and try out a Call of Duty game from 2008 nonetheless, one would call it uncharacteristic for me. So, through my unattached approach to this title, can I answer the question of, does this game still hold up in 2021? Absolutely. But does it? Yes and no. That may seem like an uncertain response, but the answer depends on who you really ask. You see, after purchasing the PC version off of Steam, just as I sort of expected, I found out that the multiplayer has been stripped from the title and Activision no longer supports the game with their servers. So, if you're the type of person who likes to play multiplayer in Call of Duty games, no, the game does not hold up. But if you're here for the campaign, it's a difficult thing to answer. First, let's discuss the least dated thing about this game, the plot. The game follows two individuals from the Second World War, Soviet soldier Petrenko and American Marine Miller. These plots do not ever converge, they simply exist to offer the player the experience of the Eastern Front and the Pacific Front. Both are silent protagonists, primarily led by NPC characters that, depending on who you ask, you will either see as simple tutorials or as engaging characters that make the plot even more interesting. Miller's plot follows the American campaign to defeat the Japanese in the Pacific Front. Your story takes you from island to island, taking each one over as you sort of progress and win the war. Whilst the Soviet campaign follows Petrenko from what I can assume was the around middle point of the siege of Stalingrad up until the Soviets took over Berlin. Petrenko's story is fundamentally more engaging than Miller's. This isn't because the writers did a necessarily bad job at presenting the plot lines, but because the weight of the events that happen in the Soviet campaign, to me at the very least, are much more grave than what takes place during the Pacific Front. And yes, you can say that this is due to a personal bias towards sort of the different fronts of the war. However, to me, the American war with the Japanese always had a lesser involvement of the American civilians than the war between the Soviets and Germans. This can also be seen where the main events sort of transpire. The American plotline primarily takes place on lowly populated islands, where the main human presence is the Japanese military itself along with the Americans, whilst the Soviet plot takes primarily in large cities where initially you sort of know, hey, civilians used to live here, and with the threat of extermination, Petrenko cannot really afford any setback in the war like the Americans can, and this is not to say that the Americans had it easy, not by a long shot. In the campaign, you will see a good amount of your friends and allies die.
Shoot, Pulaski. Shoot. I still can't believe it. Most solid, dependable, and courageous Marine we've ever known. Blink of an eye. Gone.
But there is plenty of moments where you go, this isn't nearly as staked as the Soviet war is, because they're sort of all threatened, hey, our civilians are gonna get fucking mass murdered, and they've already been mass murdered. With With the Japanese, it's been sort of a more, I guess, how do I put this, a more formal war. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but the reality is that the American and Japanese war involved less civilian casualties, at the very least in the beginning. Well, there was a good amount of civilian casualties at the end there. But with the Soviet campaign, it was always sort of a lot of civilian casualties that happened. It was a much more informal, much more brutal, much more sort of chaotic and wild warfare, as opposed to something that the American were waging against the Japanese, which was, as I described, a lot more island hopping, taking over strategic places, whilst with the Soviets and the Germans, it was a brutal sort of campaign where there was a lot more carnage, a lot more eye for an eye. This isn't about strategy. This is about morality, our desires to dominate over you. And the Soviets, it was about survival. They were being the prey in this scenario. If they didn't fight back, they would be dead. It wouldn't just be like a strategic or economical loss to them. This is not to take away from the fact that both stories do their main purposes incredibly well, providing the context needed to immerse yourself within the conflict. As Miller, you immerse yourself as this young Marine incredibly well. The fact that he is your introduction to the game really does mimic the fact that you are the novice to the game as well. Petrenko's storyline is the kind of the flip of that. He survived a massacre in Stalingrad. He's much more well trained than Miller, I want to say, but so are you at this point. And his main training is not really to kill. There's much less killing going on with your introduction to Petrenko. It's more about survival at any cost, which is the incredible job of immersing you within the storyline of the Soviets, which, as I mentioned before, was to survive their invaders. In my opinion, also, the Petrenko storyline has a much more interesting NPC ally because, so this is Sergeant Rezhnov, I believe. Maybe he's not a sergeant. Fuck if I know. Anyway, Soviet military man Rezhnov helps you to get out of Stalingrad as it's sort of being attacked. He's an incredibly patriotic Soviet. He constantly spits Soviet propaganda and uplifting messages on the way that they will, send the German scum back to help.
This place once echoed with conversations of friends and lovers. No longer. Mark my words, comrade. One day things will change. We will take the fight to their land, to their people, to their blood. This way.
This rhetoric is incredibly great at immersing you within the Eastern Front. This is what the Soviets would have been doing to each other. They would be uplifting each other. They would be viewing the Germans as these scum, these villainous creatures that sort of came and just attacked them because they weren't doing anything. The Soviets were losing the war for 2 years straight. It was only, I believe, around 1943 when the tide began to turn and they began to fighting back, reclaiming land from the Germans, and the reality was the Soviets were not going to forget all the suffering and the misery that was induced to them by the Germans.
These men are trying to surrender!
Look around you, Chernov. Do you think these men will be denied their revenge? That comes only two ways. Fast or slow. Dmitri, it is your choice. Chernov, you should learn from Dmitri. He understands the nature of mercy.
I think it's also a good time to quickly interject. With this review, I'm not really making any sort of statement on history, current sort of positions on anyone. I'm just attempting to review the game and making assumptions on what the creators of the game wanted to tell with their characters. So I understand a lot of this is contentious to a lot of people. I'm not doing that. I'm simply approaching this towards what you'll experience as you play the game, if you choose to. My point with all of this being that both stories serve as context for the gameplay. Both do an amazing job at making you feel that you are not just shooting mindless NPCs, but you're doing something of importance to your characters. I think if there is any reason for me to decide whether the Soviet campaign is better, though, it'll be primarily with how the stories end. Both campaigns end with sort of a satisfying ending to their character arcs, and yet to me personally at least, the American storyline ends a little bit weaker than the Soviet ones.
It's over.
Everything that was asked of us, we've done. Every night, we lay in a filthy foxhole praying the enemy won't slit our throats. Every day was spent crawling through the mud and the dirt while bullets whistle all around. This is the enemy's last stand. When we take Shuri Castle, we go home. All of us.
Make it, my friend. You always survive.
The honor should be yours.
As long as you live. The heart of this army can never be broken.
Things will change, my friend. As heroes, we will return to Russia's embrace.
So, yeah, I mean, it sort of hits a little bit closer to heart, a little bit more finality to it. And yes, there's sort of a limitation to how the story was being told, and you can really achieve a similar thing with Miller, but at the same time, it is what it is, and that's how I have to judge the game, and that's sort of, for me, why the Soviet campaign is a little bit higher, or at the very least a little bit more memorable. It's just that ending is that little feel of what you're playing as. And that would be all for the review of the plot. Let's move on to gameplay. Gameplay-wise, you have your basic movements included, so you have crouching, going prone, running, jumping, etc. You can, use things for cover. You have 2 weapons, I suppose, in your loadout that you can use when you need to kill enemies at a distance. Then you have a melee attack if you needed to sort of attack if something's really attacking you close by. There's also sometimes quick time events depending on the situation you are in, and there's grenades. In quick addition to the grenades, because it's a little bit more technical, because it actually does depend on who you play as. So when you play as Miller, your eventual special grenade will be the smoke grenade, while when you play as Petrenko, you'll be given the Molotov. And for the first time, I actually don't think this decision was because purely, hey, Petrenko is Russian, so give him Molotov. You see, as sort of implied to before, the Soviet campaign primarily takes place in populated cities, meaning that smoke grenades are usually useless, and a Molotov is much more better to sort of block off entrances, burn a bunch of enemies standing in a single location behind a cover, while as Miller, you are primarily in trenches and in open fields. Hence, a makeshift covering that the smoke grenade provides you is much more important and much more better sort of gameplay-wise than a Molotov that you would really not have a chance to really use for its intended purposes. But how does it play? Honestly, pretty well. I had no sense that there was anything particularly dated. The countless amounts of death that I experienced within the game was actually primarily because of my gamer-fueled egoism and desire to play the game at the hardest difficulty possible, and not realizing the fact that, hey, there's no way to switch the, game difficulty after you started the plot line. Which is, I guess, the only thing that's quote-unquote outdated that's included in a most modern title, is that switch the difficulty on the fly. One more main flaw I found, but that's not necessarily with the date of the game. I think it's just an issue with the game genre as a whole. It would be the uselessness of the majority of the gun classes. You see, rifles are by far the best option to have on you at all times. The ammo is probably going to be always available. It lets you get an instant headshot, so instant kill, one-shot kill from a good range, so typically medium to long ranges, you're good for using this. 2 shots and the enemy is clear. And this is where the issue lies in. So you have the other classes. So you have pistols. They're completely useless and overpowered by any other gun. Then you have shotguns, and in fact, they're so useless, I think I've only ever encountered one in the game. But it's also completely unnecessary because its entire purpose of killing, a lot of enemies at once and sort of clearing rooms is fulfilled instantly with a submachine gun because of its amount of ammo. And you'll probably use it as a secondary a lot of times because there's a lot of ammo lying around for it. For the full machine guns, while yes, they're sort of usable, they're more a nuisance because you're not going to find a lot of ammo for it. So you'll probably use it quickly and then just throw it away quickly after because there's other things lying around with much more ammo and you're not going to really want to look around for that ammo. You'd rather have sort of a rifle on you for that kind of instant kill and then a submachine gun to sort of quickly clear everything else. There's also, I guess, the sniper rifle, and they're incredibly rare throughout the game because they're not really that useful. But when the game is made for them, they're pretty fun to use. There's the flamethrower, which is mainly gimmicky, but still kind of fun to use. The RPG launcher was kind of gimmicky, but it sort of needed to be included because it was the only legitimate way to sort of get rid of a tank. Speaking of tanks, there will be moments in the game where you sort of get to use, I guess, machines and vehicles, but they're very narratively dependent. It's not a lot of the times. And while they're fun sequences, it's going to be a rare moment. So that's just it for that moment. Overall, the game is a pretty good World War II simulator. You feel immersed into it. The only thing that's like really, really dated is the visuals. Sort of kind of expected that the game from 2008 is going to be visually outdated. And if that's a thing that really grinds your gears, then yeah, this will be a major sort of turn off for the game. So other than that, does the single player still hold up in 2021? Yes. Should you purchase it? Absolutely fucking not. I know I just spent a very good long time praising this game, but the reality is, this game is around 18 American dollars, and depending on where you live, the taxation method, any other charges on your bank statements, etc., it's actually going to be more. So you're looking at around 20 USD. And the game comes with a broken multiplayer system, broken co-op system. Oh, and just because I know someone was going to point this out, this is the first title where there is a Call of Duty Zombies mode. But that's kind of broken. Technically, you can play the game offline in single player, but my understanding is that this game mode was built for co-op. So if you actually want to have fun with the system and the game mode, you want to play in co-op, but co-op doesn't work. So you're being shipped 2 game modes that don't fucking work. I think ultimately there are other more modern Call of Duty games that can emulate this feel that this game produces. At the same time, there are other franchises that sort of do a similar thing. Plus, for 20 USD, you can probably get an incredibly modern title with an incredibly deep lore. If that's your thing. Sort of, if you're going to buy this for the campaign and the single player, get a game that's modern. Sort of, you're going to support some great indie developers, most likely for a $20 price tag, and you're just going to have a much better time and much more bang for your buck. I just think this game cannot be worth more than $5. So, yeah, at that note, I sign off, gamers, and wish you all the best.